The mountains of Bell County, Kentucky don't ask who you are, they just watch. From 30 miles out, the ridgeline looks like the edge of something older, then names a long dark spine running against a sky the color of pewter, holding its ground the way stone holds everything. Cold, patient, without explanation. Closer, in the hollows open like clenched fists, releasing. Creek beds appear, tree lines thicken, the roads narrow until they stop being roads at all and become something else, suggestions really. Intentions pressed into dirt by tires that came through once and didn't come back. One road like that runs off Caney Fork, barely a road, 2 ruts through brown November grass, a cabin at the end of it that hasn't seen a living soul in weeks, a chimney on the south wall, cracked, wide enough at the top to fit 2 fingers in, wide enough it turns out to change everything. A 20-year-old girl with $312 in a coffee can just turned onto that road. She doesn't know yet what's inside that chimney. She doesn't know yet what's already been filed against this land. She just parks, gets out, looks at the crack, and puts her hand on the stone. She was 20 years old. She had $312 in a coffee can, and she had an address on a piece of paper she'd read so many times the fold had gone soft. That was it. That was everything. The lawyer had called on a Thursday. She'd been sleeping in the break room of the lumber yard where she worked 3 days a week. The other 4 days she spent not working, which is a polite way of saying she spent them trying not to think about the fact that she had nowhere to go. The call came at 6:47 in the morning. She answered because she always answered, because you don't not answer when you have nothing left to lose. The lawyer's name was Ferris. He had the voice of a man who delivered news like this regularly and had learned to do it without inflection. Your grandmother, estate, property, Bell County. She sat up on the break room couch. The cushion had a spring that had been poking her in the hip for 3 nights straight. She didn't notice it anymore. How much land? She said. The deed shows approximately 19 acres on Caney Fork Road. She didn't say anything. Miss Whitfield, I'm here. She wasn't sure that was true. Ora Whitfield had been dead 6 weeks when Dial found out she'd left her anything at all. 6 weeks of not knowing. 6 weeks of sleeping on that couch with the broken spring, eating vending machine crackers, telling herself she was fine. She was 20 years old and she was fine. She was not fine. But here was the address. Here was the deed. Here was the paper folded soft in her jacket pocket. And here was her truck, a 1991 Ford Ranger with a cracked dashboard and a heater that worked only when it wanted to pointed north on Route 421 at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday in October. Tuesday, she thought, a bad day to start a life. Then she thought you don't get to pick. She stopped at an Exxon in Pineville, checked the oil, bought a gas station sandwich she couldn't really afford, and ate it standing next to the pump because the cab of the truck smelled like old coffee and she needed air. The mountains were doing what mountains do in October in Bell County, going gold at the tops, red in the middle, still green at the creek beds holding on. She'd grown up in Harlan County, 40 miles south, close enough to know this country, far enough that it still felt like someone else's, Ora's country. She got back in the truck and drove. The thing about Ora Whitfield, the thing Dial had been turning over for 6 weeks trying to understand, was that she never explained herself. Not once. Not in 20 years of Sunday phone calls, not in the birthday cards that came every year, written in that slanted blue ink, not in the single visit Dial could remember when she was 9 and Ora had sat in the kitchen of their apartment and drunk 3 cups of coffee and said almost nothing and left. That was Ora, present, silent, watching. Documents don't lie, she used to say back when Dial was 12 and would sit under her desk at the county office watching her work. People do. Documents just forget to mention things. Dial had thought that was funny, the way an adult says something that sounds like wisdom but is really just the truth they've been carrying so long it's worn smooth. She understood it differently now. Aura had spent 28 years as a court secretary in Harlan County, 1961 to 1989. She'd come in early and stayed late and filed things with a precision that her supervisors took for granted and her co-workers found slightly unnerving. She knew where every deed lived, every plat map, every lien record going back 40 years, and she had quietly, without explaining herself, because she never explained herself, arranged for her 17-year-old granddaughter to spend 2 summers doing part-time filing at the Bell County Assessor's Office. "You'll be good at it," she'd said. "Not, I need you to do this. Not trust me, just you'll be good at it." Dale had been good at it. She'd learned to read deed books, plat maps, how a tax lien gets filed, how a property changes hands, and how sometimes it doesn't change hands even when someone wants it to. She didn't know why she needed to know that. She did now. 3 days before she died, Aura had put something into Dale's hand, a tortoiseshell hair comb. Old, the back engraved with 2 letters she didn't recognize yet. "Keep it," Aura had said. "You'll need it sometime." Not "this was mine," not "this will explain everything," just "keep it." Dial had kept it because Aura told her to. The comb was in her jacket pocket right now, had been there since the hospital. She didn't know whose initials those were. She didn't know what it opened or explained or remembered. Not yet. Caney Fork Road appeared on her left at mile marker 14, a dirt track really. 2 tire ruts through the grass heading up into the tree line, the kind of road that says if you don't know where you're going, turn around. She turned onto it anyway. The cabin sat at the end of the track, maybe a quarter mile in a clearing that hadn't been mowed since spring. The grass was knee-high and brown at the tips. An oak on the eastern edge had gone full red. A maple near the door was still half green, holding out. The cabin itself was small, 1 story, maybe 600 square feet, stone foundation, board and batten siding that had weathered to the color of old pewter, a porch roof that sagged slightly on the left side, a rusted tin roof with 2 different colored patches where someone had repaired it at different times in different decades. The window on the south side was intact. The door hung straight. The chimney, a fieldstone chimney running up the south wall, maybe 18 feet from hearth to cap, had a crack in it. That was the first thing she noticed, before the sagging porch, before the overgrown grass, before anything else. The crack. It ran vertically from about shoulder height up through the 3rd course below the crown, wide at the top, maybe half an inch, tapering down, narrowing to almost nothing at the base. Light came through it when she stood inside and looked up. She hadn't gone inside yet. She knew this because she was still standing in the clearing 20 feet away, but she could see the light. She walked toward it. The stone was cold when she put her hand on it. October cold, the kind that doesn't move, the kind that sits on you. She pressed her palm flat against the face of the chimney and felt the age of it, the decades of freeze and thaw of wood smoke and rain and ice working at the mortar until it crumbled from the inside out. Whoever built this knew what they were doing. The courses were even, the stones were fitted. Whoever built this had pulled them from a creek bed and sorted them by size and stacked them with care. They were old. The building of them was old, but the crack was new, new in the way a fracture is new, sudden after years of pressure. She leaned in, put her eye to the widest part, the way a child looks through a keyhole, and in the dim interior of the chimney flue, maybe 4 courses up from the firebox throat, something pale caught the light filtering down from above. Not stone, not mortar, something placed. She stood back, looked at it, thought, okay. She went to the truck for her knife. The mortar crumbled more than it chipped, gray and powdery. the lime long since gone neutral given back to the stone. She worked the blade in at the height where she'd seen it, not forcing, just finding where the old bond had already surrendered. Soft work, patient work. 2 stones shifted when she worked at the third course, and she caught them with her forearm before they could fall. Behind them, set deliberately into a void between the outer face and the flue liner, a gap that shouldn't have existed in any standard construction, which meant it had been put there on purpose, was a tin box, army surplus, olive drab, 8 inches long, 5 wide, 2 deep, the lid held down by a wire twist, wrapped in a layer of oilskin before it had been set in. No rust, or almost none. She carried it to the hearthstone and sat down with it in her lap. She didn't open it right away. There's a thing that happens when you're 20 years old and you've been sleeping on a couch with a broken spring for 3 weeks and you haven't had a real meal in 2 days, and suddenly you're sitting on the cold stone floor of a cabin you just inherited from a woman who never explained herself. There's a thing that happens in your chest, a kind of stillness that isn't calm. That's more like the second before something. She sat in it for a while. The crow called once from the tree line, went quiet. Then she opened the box. Inside, a folded letter, a smaller envelope with something flat and hard inside, a hand-drawn map on paper so old it had gone the color of weak tea. She unfolded the map first, just enough to see it was of this property: creek on the south edge, ridgeline to the north, the square that had to be this cabin, and in the lower right corner, in faded pencil, a set of numbers she didn't understand yet. 6 digits, a dash, 4 more. She folded it back along its original creases carefully because the paper wanted to split, set it on her knee. The letter was in her grandmother's handwriting. She knew it immediately. The slant, the pressure of the pen, the way Aura's 7s always had a crossbar, a habit she'd picked up somewhere and never let go. The letter was dated March 2003, 20 years ago. Dial had been 3 years old. It began, "Whoever finds this, not to Dale, not to my granddaughter, not to whoever I love most, whoever finds this," as if she'd already made peace with the possibility that the person who came might be a stranger. Dial read it slowly, twice, because some of the words were hard to make out where the pen had run dry, and Aura had pressed harder to compensate, because she needed the words to settle before she could feel what they meant. Aura wrote about the chimney first. Her father, Dale's great-great-grandfather, a man named August Whitfield, had built it in 1931 with stone pulled from Garner Creek. He'd set the tin box in during construction, mortared over it. She had watched him do it as a girl of 7. He said the mountain takes everything eventually, but stone keeps secrets longer than wood. She wrote that she'd never disturb the box because she didn't think it was hers to disturb, that it belonged to whoever the cabin belonged to next. Then she wrote about the land. She wrote that her father had marked the boundaries of a parcel 43 acres running from the chimney stone at the corner of the cabin northeast to the ridge line, then east along the ridge to a particular chestnut stump, then south down to the creek, then back west along the creek bank to the start. She wrote that the parcel had never been properly filed. She wrote one sentence that Dial had to read 4 times before it settled. The land is not what was sold, only the deed was sold, and a deed is just a piece of paper with someone's handwriting on it. She put the letter down. She looked at the small envelope. Inside a key, brass, small, the old kind with a round bow and a simple 2-notch bit, the kind that opens a lockbox or a post office drawer. No label, no explanation, just the key and a faint rust shadow where it had rested against the paper. She turned it over. On the inside of the bow, scratched fine with something sharp, P.O. 114 MBRKY, Middlesboro, Kentucky, Post office, box 114. Dale sat with that for a long moment. She thought about the spring house. About 40 yards down the slope from the cabin, she could see the roof of it from here. Her first instinct had been the key opens that, but she hadn't tried yet. She didn't try because the initials on the key said otherwise, and because Aura had been a court secretary who knew that land records and tax notices and correspondence with county offices go to registered addresses, not to spring houses. She was starting to understand what she was holding. This wasn't just a letter. This was a series of instructions designed to be followed in order by someone who knew how. Outside, the light had shifted. Late afternoon in a hollow, cuts short. The ridgeline takes the sun early, and the cold comes in with the shadow. It was maybe 40 degrees now, getting colder. She needed to get inside, start a fire, eat something. She had the last of a sleeve of crackers and a can of pinto beans in the truck. She put everything back in the tin box in the order she'd found it, carried it inside under her arm, set it on the table next to the lamp, built the fire from coals. The previous visitor, whenever they'd been, had left a small pile of red oak splits stacked by the hearth, and she was grateful for that in a way that almost undid her. The small anonymous kindness of stacked wood left for whoever came next. The fire caught. The cabin warmed in stages the way a stone building always does from the stove, outward the cold retreating first from near the heat, then slowly from the corners over the course of an hour. She ate standing up. Crackers, half the can of beans heated in the pot, water from the spring which she'd checked first clear cold, no smell of iron or sulfur. Good water. She turned the lamp low and read the letter again. Aura had addressed it to no one by name. Whoever finds this, she'd begun. That phrase still sat with her. Not her grandchild, not her family, whoever, as if she'd looked at the future and decided she couldn't predict who would be brave enough or desperate enough or lost enough to end up here. And so she'd written to all of them, and one of them had turned out to be Dale. She set the letter down, looked at the key on the table beside the lamp. Middlesboro was 18 miles east. She could drive it in the morning. She thought about the 43 acres, the land that had never been filed, the chestnut stump on the ridgeline, the creek. She thought about Aura paying her way into that part-time job at the assessor's office, quietly, without explanation. 2 years of reading deed books and plat maps and learning how a property changes hands. You'll be good at it. It hadn't been a compliment. It had been preparation. Dale Whitfield was 20 years old, and she'd been sleeping on a couch with a broken spring for 3 weeks, and she'd driven 3 hours on Route 421 with everything she owned in the bed of a truck that burned oil faster than it should, and she had not known, had not understood, not fully that the woman who raised her had spent the last several years of her life arranging things, not leaving things, arranging them for her. The lamp burned low. She tilted the base to level the fuel without thinking, the way you do things you've done enough times that your hands know them before your mind does. Outside, the wind had come up along the ridge and was moving through the hollow with that low variable sound, almost like breath. The fire popped once a period at the end of a sentence. She banked it with 2 splits of oak. She climbed into the bunk and lay there listening. She didn't sleep right away. She thought about the letter, the key, the map with the numbers she didn't understand yet. She thought about the 6-digit number followed by a dash and 4 more digits. It looked like a surveyor's notation. It looked like coordinates. It looked like a thing Aura had written down for a reason for someone who would know what to do with it. She thought you don't get to pick your Tuesdays. She slept. She woke before the light, not from a sound, from the absence of one. The wind had stopped sometime in the night, and that stillness pulled her up out of sleep the way a sudden noise might. She lay still for a moment, feeling the weight of the blanket and the cold of the cabin air above it, then sat up. The thermometer on the porch post outside the east window read 29 degrees, first hard frost. She built the fire back up from the banked coals, set the kettle, ate, standing at the window, looking out at the clearing where the frost had laid itself down heavy on the grass overnight and was catching the first gray light in a way that made the whole field look like something painted by someone who understood silence. The truck wouldn't start on the first try. Second try, it caught. She drove east on Route 421 with the heater working today it wanted to, and the window cracked an inch because the defroster wasn't quite keeping up with the condensation. The sky above the ridgeline was the particular shade of dark blue that means 20 minutes to sunrise. She wanted to be in Middlesboro when the post office opened. She got there at 8:45. The clerk behind the counter was a woman in her mid-60s with reading glasses pushed up on her head. She looked at the key, looked at Dial, did not ask any questions. Follow me. The box was in the back row, low to the floor. Number 114, a plain brass door slightly tarnished. The key went in smooth, turned without resistance, like it had been waiting, inside a single manila envelope, thick, heavy with papers. The front had no address, just a date written in the upper right corner. Aura's handwriting. October 14th, 2019. 4 years ago. Aura had put this here 4 years ago, and no one had come for it. Until today. Dial took it to the truck, sat in the parking lot with the engine running and the heater blowing, and the manila envelope in her lap. She opened it slowly. Inside, a hand-drawn map, a folded document on heavier paper with the look of official filings, and a short note in Aura's handwriting on a piece of lined paper torn from a composition notebook. The map was of a property she didn't recognize, a different piece of land, a creek she didn't know the name of, a ridge line running northeast, a spring marked with a small cross. She looked at the document. Bell County, Kentucky, dated 1961, land deed, 43 acres, running from a creek called Tanner Branch east to the ridge line, then north along the ridge to a stone marker at the corner of the old Delhart timber lease. She read it again. 43 acres, a second parcel, not the cabin, not the 19 acres on Caney Fork Road, different land, 43 acres on Tanner Branch that no one had told her about, that Aura had never not once in 20 years of Sunday phone calls mentioned. She looked at the short note, Aura's handwriting. 8 lines, taxes paid through 2019. After that, whoever holds this decides. She read that line 3 times. After that, whoever holds this decides. Not, I'm sorry I couldn't keep paying. Not, I meant to tell you. Just, I paid as long as I could, and now I'm leaving the rest to whoever has the courage to walk through the door I've left open. There was a structure on the land, the note said. Aura used that word. Structure. Not cabin, not building. Structure, as if she wanted to be precise without being specific. The structure had been there since before the land was hers. Someone else had built it, someone who'd been there before. And then at the bottom of the note, in ink slightly darker than the rest, as if she'd gone back and added it later, wanting to be sure, one final line. The land remembers who stays. Dial sat in the truck for a long time after that. The heater hummed. The parking lot of the Middlesboro post office on a Tuesday morning in October was not busy. A woman walked in with a package. A man walked out with a handful of mail. Nobody looked at the truck. Nobody looked at the girl inside it holding a 40-year-old land deed to 43 acres she'd never heard of. She thought about the drive out here, about Route 421 and the gold in the tops of the trees, about the cracked chimney and the oilskin box and the key that turned without resistance. She thought about the words after that. Whoever holds this decides. She was the whoever. That had apparently always been the plan. She thought, okay, Aura, okay. She folded the envelope close, set it on the passenger seat next to the coffee can, drove back west on Route 421 toward Bell County, toward the cabin on Caney Fork Road, toward whatever came next. The frost had melted by the time she got back. The field looked ordinary again, just grass, just a clearing, just a cabin with a cracked chimney. She got out of the truck. She looked at the chimney. She thought about August Whitfield pulling stone from Garner Creek in 1931, fitting them by hand, setting a tin box in a void between the outer face and the flue liner and mortaring over it. The mountain takes everything eventually, but stone keeps secrets longer than wood. She walked toward the cabin. The crow was back in the tree line. It called once, just once. She had $312 in a coffee can. She had a key that had turned without resistance. She had 2 deeds and a map and a note that said the land remembers. And she had the feeling, quiet, particular, the kind that settles into your chest before you fully thought it through, that things were about to get a great deal more complicated before they got simpler. She walked inside, built the fire up from the morning coals, set the kettle on, sat down at the table with the manila envelope, and started reading more carefully, because court secretaries know that every document tells a story if you know how to read it, and DEL had spent 2 summers learning how to read. So she read. She started at the beginning, the deed, the legal description of the parcel, the survey lines, the bearing trees, the creek called Tanner Branch, the stone marker at the Delhart timber lease corner, the chestnut stump on the ridgeline. She read it the way Aura had taught her, not for the words, but for the gaps between them, for what it didn't say, for the things a document forgets to mention. And then she found it, at the bottom of the deed, in a margin note, written in a different hand than the rest, not Aura's handwriting, older, stiffer, the kind of handwriting you learned in school in the 1940s and kept your whole life, a single annotation, taxes current as a filing, property uncontested as of 1961. She thought as of. She sat back, looked at the ceiling. The fire was going now, the cabin warming in its slow stone way, the cold retreating from the stove outward. Taxes paid through 2019. After that, whoever holds this decides. She did the math. She was good at math. It had taken her only a moment. 3 years of unpaid taxes. 3 years. And then she thought, if someone files a tax lien on a property and the owner doesn't respond, she stopped. She'd seen this before. At the assessor's office, she'd filed the paperwork herself more than once. She knew exactly what happened. She knew the statute, KRS 134.452. After 90 days, third-party purchaser. She was on her feet before she decided to stand up, because if Aura had stopped paying in 2019, and if 3 years of delinquency meant a certificate of delinquency had been filed, and if someone had already purchased that certificate, she was at the truck before the thought finished. The drive to the Bell County Clerk's office in Middlesboro was 18 miles. She'd just done it. She'd just been there. She turned around and drove back. She didn't let herself finish the thought the whole way there. She found parking, went inside. The clerk was a young woman she hadn't seen before, maybe 25, with the careful, neutral expression of someone who works at a government desk and has learned not to react to things. Dale gave her the parcel number, the one on the deed. The clerk typed it, looked at her screen for a moment, typed something else, did not react. There is a lien of record on this parcel, she said. Filed September 12, 2023. Dale heard herself say, who filed it? The clerk turned the screen so she could see. Ridgeback Timber, LLC. The lien had been filed September 12th. 90 days from September 12th was December 11th. Today was November 14th. She stood at the counter and counted on her fingers, even though she didn't need to count on her fingers because she already knew the answer. 27 days. She had 27 days. She walked out of the Bell County Clerk's office into the cold November air of Middlesboro, Kentucky, and stood on the sidewalk and looked up at the sky, gray flat October, shifting to November gray, and thought, Aura, what did you do? What did you set in motion? Because Aura had stopped paying in 2019, had left the deed in a post office box, had hidden the key in the chimney, had left the note after that whoever holds this decides. She hadn't forgotten to pay the taxes. She'd stopped, on purpose, which meant she'd known this would happen. She'd known the land would become vulnerable. She'd known that a company like Ridgeback Timber would be watching, would notice, would file the moment the window opened. And she'd left the key where someone with the right eyes would find it, in enough time to fight. 27 days. Dale Whitfield was 20 years old. She had $312 in a coffee can and a truck that burned oil and a cracked chimney and a post office envelope full of paper that added up to 43 acres of land she'd never heard of. She pulled out her phone. She had one call to make. 27 days. She said it out loud in the parking lot of the Bell County Clerk's office, just to hear it, just to make it real in the air outside her head. The sky didn't respond. The parking lot didn't care. A man walked past with a bag of groceries and didn't look at her. Right. Okay. Fine. She got in the truck, sat there for a minute with both hands on the wheel and the engine off. Think. She knew what a certificate of delinquency was. She'd filed them herself, sitting at a metal desk in the Bell County assessor's office at 17 years old, feeding paper into a machine that didn't always cooperate. She knew that when a property owner didn't pay taxes for long enough, the certificate became a lien. She knew that once that lien was purchased by a third party, purchased like a product, like someone walking up to a counter and buying the right to your land, the original owner had a limited window to respond. 90 days, KRS 134.452, third-party purchaser, September 12th to December 11th. She needed a lawyer. She knew one name, Maddox Fenn. Houston Crail had mentioned it twice in the same sentence, which was as close to a recommendation as a retired man who barely talked was going to give. Houston himself had been the Bell County deputy assessor for 19 years before he retired to a garage full of boxes and a phone he answered when he felt like it. He'd felt like it. She'd called him first thing that morning, and he'd picked up on the second ring. She called him again now. Ridgeback Timber, she said, filed September 12th, 27 days left. A pause, the kind that means he's already figured out more than she said. Ridgeback, not a question, not surprise, something else, something flat and old. You know them. I know what they are, he said, which was different, and more. He gave her Maddox's number, said one more thing before he hung up. Dial, whatever Aura left in that box, don't let anyone see it before Maddox does. Not the clerk, not anyone. She looked at the manila envelope on the passenger seat. Already didn't, she said. Maddox Fenn's office was behind a building on Cumberland Avenue that had at various points in its life been a pharmacy, a hardware store, and something that might have been a barber shop. The current door was green, the paint was peeling, the buzzer worked on the third push. He was 53 years old, or looked it, gray at the temples, a jacket that had been expensive once, reading glasses he took off and put back on 3 times while she talked. She talked for 11 minutes. She timed it because she was aware she was burning through his patience, and she wanted to be efficient and not waste what she hadn't earned yet. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he picked up the manila envelope she'd set on his desk and turned it over without opening it. This was in the post office box. Yes. Aura filed that address change at the assessor's office when, 2019, he set the envelope down, took off his glasses, looked at the wall for a moment. So Ridgeback sent notification to the cabin address, not the registered contact. The cabin's been empty for 6 weeks. Since she died. He put the glasses back on, opened the envelope, read the deed, read it again, looked at the margin note, read the short note in Aura's handwriting, set it down, took the glasses off. You understand what this is? I think so. Tell me. She took a breath. Ridgeback sent notification to an address where no one was home, but the registered contact at the county office is P.O. Box 114. They were required to use that address. They didn't, which means the notification wasn't proper, which means I can argue the 90-day window hasn't started. Maddox looked at her, not impressed, not unimpressed, measuring. You're 20. Yes, you know how to read a deed. My grandmother made sure of it. He looked back at the documents, at the margin note, at the 1961 deed with 2 signatures, 2 witnesses, ink that had gone brown with age. This deed is valid, he said. It was properly executed, witnessed. It predates any of Ridgeback's claims by 62 years. If we can establish you as the rightful heir and demonstrate defective notification. He stopped, tapped the desk once. It's not nothing. Can you file a motion? I can file an emergency motion. Stay the lien transfer. Give us time to make the full argument. He looked up at her. But I need to know something first. What? Why did Aura stop paying the taxes in 2019? Dial was quiet for a moment. I think she wanted someone to have to fight for it. He looked at her. She said it more carefully this time. I think she knew Ridgeback was watching. I think she knew the moment she stopped paying they'd move. I think she left everything in that box because she wanted whoever came to have enough time to respond, but only if they were paying attention. She paused. She knew exactly how this worked. Maddox was quiet for a long time. Then, I'll file the motion tomorrow morning. I have $312. I know. That's not enough for... I know, he said again. Not unkind, not kind either. Just I know, which was its own kind of answer. He did not explain what he was going to do about that. She decided not to push. She drove back to the cabin. The road felt different on the way back, longer somehow. The same trees, the same creek glimpsed through the gaps, the same gray sky. But she was carrying more now than she'd carried on the way in, and weight changes distance. She sat at the table that night with the lamp low and the fire going, and the deed from Tanner Branch laid out flat in front of her. 43 acres, Tanner Branch, stone marker at the old Delhart timber lease corner, chestnut stump on the ridge line. She didn't know where any of that was, but she had a map, the hand-drawn one from the box. She spread it out beside the deed, the creek on the south, the ridge line to the northeast, the cabin marked as a square, a road coming in from the west marked CR7 in Aura's small, careful writing, distances noted in tenths of a mile, elevation marks at every fork. Aura had driven this road. Aura had known every bend, and then because she couldn't sleep, because the cabin was quiet in the way that hollow country gets quiet in November, a silence so complete it rings, she started matching the map to the deed description. Tanner Branch, creek running west to east, property line follows the north bank for a quarter mile, then turns north at a large limestone outcrop. She found the limestone outcrop on the map, a small triangle, a notation good landmark can't miss. Can't miss. Aura. She fell asleep at the table with her head on her arms and the fire dying down around her, and dreamed briefly of a woman she barely knew sitting in a kitchen in Harlan County, drinking 3 cups of coffee and watching everything and saying almost nothing. She woke at 5, ate crackers, drank coffee she made too strong, watched the sky go from black to blue to the gray that means frost again, and then she drove to Tanner Branch. The road was exactly where the map said it would be. CR7, a gravel track off the state highway heading south into second growth hardwood, the oaks still holding their brown leaves in the stubborn way they do in November, everything else stripped to bone. She found the creek at mile 2, Tanner Branch smaller than she'd expected, serious water, not wide, running clear and fast over flat limestone shelves in the cold. At mile 3.5, where the deed survey said there should be a gate or a property marker, she found a gap in the tree line, gate posts still standing, wire long since cut or rusted through, curled into the leaf litter. She pulled over, got out into the cold, maybe 26 degrees the wind, with an edge and stood at the gap. The track continued past it, barely a track now, 2 parallel depressions through the forest floor, the center hump reclaimed by saplings. Nothing bigger than 10 years old. Nobody had driven this in a decade. She walked it on foot. 400 yards in the structure appeared, set back from the creek on a slight rise. Whoever chose the location knew water, knew floodlines, knew the creek's moods across seasons. It was smaller than she'd expected, more intact than she had any right to hope. Log construction, the chinking mostly holding, a tin roof that had shed its rust in long orange streaks down the walls but hadn't failed at the ridge. One window on the south face, the glass clouded but unbroken, and a stone chimney on the east end, field stone, pale gray limestone with darker shale worked in for contrast. The mortar cracked in places, repointed at least twice by different hands at different times. Someone had cared for this. Someone had come back over the years and repointed the mortar and kept the roof from failing and done it without being asked. The door was padlocked, old iron lock gone green with age. She'd brought the bolt cutter. The shackle gave on the second bite, dropped into the leaves with a sound smaller than the moment deserved. She pushed the door inward. The smell hit her before her eyes adjusted. Damp wood, old ash, something animal but not recent, seasons old. A mouse nest in the far corner, gray and compacted, the smell of cold stone and earth and time. Her eyes found the shape of it, 14 by 14 feet maybe, a wood stove against the north wall, a short stovepipe going into a thimble in the chimney breast, a plank shelf along the west wall, a rusted camp cot frame with no canvas, a wooden crate upended in the corner, pressed into service as a table. The floor was puncheon split logs with the flat face up, some of them checked badly, but all of them solid underfoot when she tested her weight. And the chimney. The chimney occupied the entire east wall, built wider than the stove required. Whoever laid it had believed in mass, or believed in storage, or both. The stonework was careful, the same pale limestone as the exterior, the same darker shale for contrast, the same someone took care pattern she'd seen outside, at about shoulder height in the mortar between 2 large keystones, not a structural crack. Structural cracks run diagonal with the weight. This was horizontal, deliberate, 6 inches wide, the edges too clean, like something had been set there and the mortar had never been filled tight around it. She ran her fingers along the edge, reached in. The back of the gap was maybe 4 inches deep. Her fingers touched something that was not stone, smooth, slightly curved. She worked it forward carefully, expecting it to crumble, expecting resistance. It came out clean. A tin, smaller than the one in the chimney at the cabin, about the size of a small cigar box. The label long gone, the lid sealed around the rim with what felt like candle wax, gray and dry and cracked in 2 places. On the bottom, scratched into the metal with something sharp, a nail, maybe a knife point, ER 1961. Not OW, not Aura, ER, someone else. She carried it to the doorway where the November light was better, turned it in her hands. ER 1961, She thought about the comb. She took it out now, held it next to the tin. ER, same initials, same year. She stood in the doorway of that small cabin with the cold at her back and the dark interior in front of her, and held a comb and a tin, and understood finally that she was not the first person to be standing at the beginning of something she didn't fully understand yet. The wax broke away in 3 pieces. The lid came off with a soft resistance, that particular give of something closed for 60 years and now open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, gone, the color of old cream, was a bundle of papers. She unfolded the oilcloth the way you unfold something borrowed. 11 sheets, handwritten in a script careful and deliberate, the kind of penmanship they taught before they stopped teaching it. Every letter formed with intention. The top sheet was a letter, unaddressed, beginning simply, "If you found this, I was not able to come back." She read it standing in the doorway with November at her back. The woman's name was Etta Rowe. She had worked this land as a sustenance farmer beginning in 1953. 8 years before she was forced to leave, she had built the chimney, this chimney, the one Dial was standing 3 feet from in the summer of 1959. With stone she pulled from the creek below the ridge. I built it wider than any stove required, because I believed in mass and I believed in time. Stone is the one thing that lasts longer than argument. She was leaving because she had run out of options, not out of will. A company called Ridgeback Lumber had been buying land around her for 3 years. 2 weeks before she wrote the letter, a man had come to her door for the second time. The first time he had been polite. The second time he brought a lawyer. She had sold the land to Ora Whitfield because Ora had offered her what it was worth, not what she could get away with paying, what it was worth. I want you to know that whoever you are, someone thought it was worth something. Dial stopped. Read that again. Someone thought it was worth something. She was 20 years old, and she had been sleeping on a couch with a broken spring and eating vending machine crackers and telling herself she was fine. And here was a woman who had been pushed off her own land in 1961, writing it down, sealing it in wax, hiding it in a chimney she'd built with her own hands, that someone had thought her land was worth something. Not a fortune, not a windfall, just worth something. The exact right price. She stood in the doorway and read it 3 more times. Etta wrote about the land, the spring 200 feet northeast. Good water tested it herself every spring for 8 years. The west window sticks in damp weather, lift and push at the same time. The chestnut at the northeast corner is the boundary marker. It has been there since before anyone who is living now was born. She wrote one line near the end that Dial had to set the papers down and breathe after. The people who take what they can from land do not understand what land is. Land is not an asset. It is a record of who was here, of who stayed, the people who take what they can. Ridgeback Lumber, 1961, Ridgeback Timber, LLC, 2023. Different name, same word, different century, same move. She turned to page 8. Etta wrote about Ora directly. She didn't know Ora's name at first. She called her the woman who came. The woman who came to the door, asked to see the deed, read it, and offered a price. She didn't negotiate down. She asked what I needed, and then she paid it. I have never known anyone to do that before. I have never known anyone to do that since. I don't know if she was a good woman in every part of her life, but in that part, on that day, she was the best kind of person I can imagine. She paid what things were worth. Dial put the papers down on the hearthstone. She sat down next to them. She looked at the chimney, at the stonework, at the careful alternation of pale limestone and dark shale that made a pattern, not just a wall. Etta Rowe had built this, alone. In the summer of 1959, she'd pulled the stone from the creek below the ridge and carried it up the slope and set it course by course and filled the mortar joints by hand. And then she put her letters in a gap she left deliberately and sealed it with candle wax and walked away because she had to. And Ora had kept the land for 62 years, paying the taxes every year until she stopped on purpose because she was running out of time and she needed someone to find it. She needed someone who would walk through the door she'd left open. Dael thought about the comb. She was holding it so tightly the tines had left marks in her palm. She thought Ora knew. She knew this was Eda's. She kept it. For 62 years she kept a dead woman's comb in a drawer somewhere and thought about the woman who'd handed it to her and said, "Remember me." And Ora had handed it to Dael without explanation. "Just keep it. You'll need it sometime." Because Ora knew that whoever came to the cabin would find the chimney, and whoever found the chimney would come here, and whoever came here would find this tin, and would mean something to them when they got there. If they'd been paying attention, she'd been paying attention. Dael pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes, hard, for just a second. Then she put the papers back in the oilcloth, folded it back, put the tin in her jacket pocket with the comb. She stood up, looked at the room one more time, the camp cot frame, the upended crate, the plank shelf where someone had once kept their things. She thought somebody should come back here. Then she drove to Houston Crail's garage. He was there when she arrived. He was always there. Retired men who have spent their whole lives maintaining records develop a relationship with organized spaces that doesn't end at 65. His garage was stacked floor to ceiling with labeled boxes, cross-referenced, the old-fashioned way, handwritten on index cards. She told him what she'd found. All of it. The letter. Eda Rowe, 1961. The land sold to Ora. The chimney. The comb. He was quiet for a long time. Ridgeback lumber, he said finally. 1961. They pushed her out. He nodded, slowly, like he was fitting a piece into a place he'd always suspected it would go. They've tried to get that parcel before, he said. Not always under that name, but the same people, different paperwork. Dael looked at him. How many times? Twice that I know of. Once in the 80s, once in the 90s. Ora contested both times. She knew what she had. She knew how to read a filing. He paused. I helped her. The second time. She never told me. She wouldn't. He said it without judgment, just fact. That was Ora. She didn't burden people with problems they couldn't solve yet. He looked at her. You can solve this one, he said, if Maddox files the motion and I can get the original address of record, documentation from the county. I still have friends in that office. I can have the papers by morning. Houston. She waited until he looked at her. Why did Ridgeback stop the last 2 times? Because Ora showed up with the right documents at the right time and made it not worth the trouble. He tilted his head slightly. She was very persuasive, not loud, not dramatic. She just walked in with a folder and said, here is what the law says. Here is my deed. Here is why you're wrong. And then she waited. Dael thought about a woman sitting in a kitchen in Harlan County, drinking 3 cups of coffee and watching everything and saying almost nothing. Okay, she said. She drove back to Tanner Branch. She didn't know why. She just needed to go back, needed to stand in that room again with the camp cot frame and the upended crate and the chimney that Eda Rowe had built wider than any stove required. She went back in and sat on the hearthstone, opened the oilcloth again, turned to the last page of Eda's letter. I don't know who you are. I don't know what brought you here. Maybe you needed a place to be. Maybe you were looking for something you couldn't name yet. I know that feeling. I lived it for 8 years in this hollow, waking up before the light and working until the dark and going to sleep, knowing I had done exactly what I was supposed to be doing with my life. Then I had to leave. But the chimney stayed, the stone stayed, and whoever you are, if you're reading this, you found it, which means you looked, which means you were paying attention. The land doesn't forget who looks. Etta Rowe, September 14th, 1961. Dayelle sat with that for a long time. The fire was long dead. The room was cold. The light through the south window had gone flat and gray late afternoon in November, the ridge cutting the sun at 3 o'clock. She needed wood. She needed to eat. She needed to drive back to the cabin before dark because the road wasn't safe in the dark, and she knew that now. She needed 27 days to not run out. But she sat there a minute longer because Etta Rowe had done the math too. Etta had known she was losing, had known the lawyers and the company and the slow machinery of being pushed out by people with more money and more paperwork and more patience for grinding. She'd known, and she'd done the one thing she could still do. She'd built the chimney wider than any stove required. She'd put the letters inside. She'd sealed them with wax. And she'd trusted, not prayed, not hoped, not wished. She'd trusted that whoever came next would be someone worth trusting. Dayelle stood up, put the oilcloth back in the tin, put the tin in her pocket, walked outside. The field was quiet, the creek audible from here, running fast over the limestone, cold and clear and running whether anyone was watching or not. She had 27 days. Maddox Fenn was filing a motion in the morning. Houston was pulling documents. And she 20 years old, $312, one truck, one cracked chimney. She was the heir to 62 years of a woman paying taxes on land she'd bought at a fair price from a woman who'd been pushed out by a company that was still 60 years later trying to take what it couldn't simply own. She got in the truck, drove back to the cabin, built the fire, ate the last of the crackers and the second half of the beans, sat at the table with both deeds laid out flat, the Tanner Branch deed and the Caney Fork deed, and studied the boundaries and the survey lines and the bearing trees until the lamp burned low. Then she picked up the comb, held it in both hands. Etta Rowe had given this comb to Ora Whitfield on the day she left, probably the day she signed the deed, probably standing in a doorway not entirely different from the one Dayelle had stood in this afternoon. Keep it so someone remembers I was here. And Ora had kept it for 62 years, and then she put it in her granddaughter's hand and said, "Keep it, you'll need it sometime." Dayelle set the comb on the table between the two deeds. She looked at it. She thought, okay, Etta, okay, Ora, I'm here. The fire popped once. Outside, somewhere up on the ridge, an owl called and went quiet. 27 days now. She would do what you do when you've been handed something you didn't earn and don't deserve and couldn't have predicted. You stay. You show up. You keep paying attention. The lamp burned low. She didn't tilt it. Let it go. She climbed into the bunk with the two deeds folded against her chest, lay there in the dark, thought about a woman who'd built a chimney wider than any stove required 64 years ago in a hollow she'd loved for 8 years and then had to leave. She hadn't prayed, hadn't hoped. She'd built. Dayelle closed her eyes. Tomorrow, everything tomorrow. Tonight just this. The cold, the dark, the sound of the creek somewhere down the slope, running clear and fast, and indifferent and perfect, running whether anyone was watching or not. 27 days, then 26, then 25. The days came off the calendar the way cold comes off a ridgeline in November, fast, relentless, without asking if you're ready. She was not ready, but she got up every morning before the light and built the fire and made the coffee too strong and drove wherever she needed to drive, because ready is something you wait for when you have time, and she did not have time. Maddox filed the emergency motion on the morning of November 15th. She was standing in his office when he did it. She'd been there since 8. He'd arrived at 8:12 with coffee he hadn't offered to share, which she respected. He was a man who worked, not a man who performed working. There's a difference. She watched him sign the papers. He looked up. Now we wait. How long? Ridgeback will respond within 3 days. They'll have lawyers from Louisville, good ones. After that, the court schedules a hearing. We have 26 days. I know how many days we have. She drove back to the cabin. Then she did something that surprised even herself. She got the short-handled spade from the lean-to behind the cabin and a box of pre-mixed mortar she'd found at the hardware store in Middlesboro for $9, and she started repointing the chimney. Not because the motion would go better if she did, not because anyone was watching, because the chimney needed it, because the crack needed to be filled, because August Whitfield had pulled that stone from Garner Creek in 1931 and stacked it with care, and the mountain had been working at the mortar for 90 years, and the least she could do, the very least, was fill the gaps. So she filled the gaps. It was painstaking work, cold work. The mortar had to be mixed at exactly the right consistency, too thick and it wouldn't seat properly, too thin, and it would shrink when it dried. She'd watched a video about it on her phone 3 nights before, watched it twice, because that's how you learn things when there's no one left to teach you. She worked from the bottom of the crack up. Press and smooth, press and smooth. The trowel left lines. She went back and feathered out. By noon, she'd filled 18 inches. By 3 o'clock, the light had gone behind the ridge, and her hands were numb, and she'd filled 4 feet. The crack wasn't closed yet, but it was smaller. She stood back and looked at it. Then she went inside and ate cornbread and thought about Etta Rowe building a chimney wider than any stove required, and felt for the first time in 3 weeks something she could only describe as useful. Maddox called on the 3rd day. She was at Tanner Branch when the phone rang. She'd been out there every day since she found the cabin, measuring the roof, assessing the floor, learning the layout of the land, walking the boundary lines where she could find them, following the creek to the North Bank property line, locating the limestone outcrop from Aura's map. She'd found the chestnut stump on the ridgeline. It was massive, 5 feet across. The chestnut blight had killed the tree in the 1930s. It had killed almost all of them, but the stump had been there so long, it had grown its own ecosystem. Moss, ferns, something small and dark living in a crack on the north side. Etta had marked it as a boundary on the 1961 deed. It was still there, which meant the survey was still good, which meant the boundary was still good, which meant the phone rang. They responded, Maddox said. Already, that's only like 40 pages. She sat down on the stump. 40 pages. They're arguing you don't have standing, that the 1961 deed was never probated, that without probate, you can't claim it as an inheritance, which means you can't challenge the lien. She was quiet. Is that true? It would be true for a testamentary deed, a deed passed through a will, but this is an inter vivos deed, a deed executed and delivered during the grantor's lifetime. Etta transferred it directly to Aura. No probate required. He paused. 2 signatures, 2 witnesses. It's in the document. So their 40 pages are wrong. Their 40 pages are expensive, and they know how to write things that sound right even when they're not. Another pause. The court has scheduled a hearing. When? December 7th. 4 days before the deadline. That's cutting it very close. Yes. If the motion is denied, then we have 4 days to file a different challenge. But that would be much harder to win. She looked out across the hollow from the top of the ridge. The land ran below her, the creek, the clearing, the cabin with its tin roof, the chimney on the east wall. 62 years of taxes paid, 62 years of someone driving out here, maybe not often, maybe just to check, just to make sure it was still standing. And it was, still standing. I'll be there, she said. Good. A pause. Dial, don't come alone. I don't have. Bring Houston, bring Lottie, bring whoever you've got. Courts respond to presence. It's not supposed to matter. It does. She called Houston. He said, what time? She called Lottie. Lottie said, I'll bring food. You don't need to bring. I'm bringing food. You don't argue with me about food. She didn't argue. The days kept coming off the calendar. 22, 21, 20. She had $312 in the coffee can. And then on the morning of November 18th, she had less, because the hardware store in Middlesboro had the exact grade of mortar she needed, and she needed 2 more bags of it and a new trowel because the one she'd borrowed from the lean-to was losing its handle. $273. She counted it, held it in her hands in the parking lot of the hardware store with the 2 bags of mortar in the truck bed. She thought, this is fine. This is fine. I am a person with $273 and a motion before the Bell County Circuit Court and 2 chimneys that need repointing. This is fine. It was not entirely fine, but she drove back to the cabin anyway, and she kept working. She was halfway up the crack when Lottie appeared at the edge of the clearing on November 20th, walking across the frostbitten grass with a covered pot in one hand and something bundled under her arm. She set the pot on the porch, stood back and looked at the chimney work. Your grandmother would approve, she said. Dial didn't stop pressing mortar. You knew her well. Well enough. Lottie sat down on the porch step. The way old people sit with intention, with the understanding that getting up again is a project, so the sitting is something to be done properly. She used to drive out here in the fall, check on things. I'd see her truck on the road and I'd know it was that time of year. Dial stopped. She came here herself, every October, without fail. Lottie looked out at the clearing. After about the 3rd year, I started leaving a pot of something on my porch when I saw her truck. She always took it, never knocked to thank me, just took it and left the pot back on my porch the next morning clean. Dial looked at the pot Lottie had just set down. Lottie met her eyes. Same recipe, she said simply. Dial had to look away for a moment, back at the chimney, back at the mortar, back at the work that needed doing. There's something else, Lottie said. If you want it. What? There's a woman at Meadow Glen, the care facility on Route 25, Nettie Foss. She's 84. She was born 2 hollows over from here, and she lived here her whole life until 3 years ago when her daughter made her go. Lottie paused. She knew Etta Rowe. Dial turned. She knew her personally. They were girls together. Nettie's 6 years younger, but they grew up close. She was here when Etta left. Lottie looked at her hands. She's asked about this land more than once, whether anyone was ever going to come, whether it was going to be lost. Dial thought about the comb in her jacket pocket. She thought later, after the hearing, after she knew there was something to tell. Tell her someone came, she said. Tell her we're working on the rest. Lottie nodded. Then she said quietly, you look like her, you know. Aura, the way you work, the way you don't stop. She paused. She never stopped either. Dial pressed the trowel against the mortar, pressed and smoothed. December 7th came the way all important days come, too fast and then all at once. She woke at 4:30, didn't need an alarm. Her body knew. She lay in the bunk for exactly 2 minutes, felt the weight of what the day was, let herself feel it because pretending things aren't heavy doesn't make them lighter. It just means you're carrying the weight without the benefit of knowing where it is. Then she got up, made the fire, made the coffee, ate half a piece of cornbread because she wasn't hungry and forced herself to eat it anyway because you cannot stand in a courtroom on an empty stomach and think clearly. Drove to Middlesboro. The Bell County Circuit Court was a building that had been standing since 1924 and looked like it. Stone facade, high ceilings, wood floors polished to glass. The kind of building that makes you feel when you walk in that things have been decided here before, that the weight of decisions lives in the walls. Maddox was already there, coffee in hand, the good suit, reading glasses on. Houston was there, old but upright, a folder under his arm. The original address of record documentation from the county files certified, copies the kind that take a week to get, and a phone call to someone who owes you a favor. He'd gotten them in 2 days. Lottie was there. She had not brought food. She had brought herself, which was more important, and she was wearing a coat that suggested she had dressed for an occasion. And behind them in the gallery, 4 rows back, 2 other people Dial didn't recognize. An older man with a work jacket, a woman about 70 with a cane. She looked at Lottie. Who are they? People who knew Aura, Lottie said simply. People who thought it mattered to be here. Dial looked at the small collection of people who had shown up on a Thursday morning in December because a 20-year-old girl was trying to keep 43 acres of land that a company with lawyers from Louisville was trying to take. She thought, okay. Ridgeback's legal team was exactly what Maddox had described. 2 lawyers, Louisville, expensive suits, the kind of men who carry briefcases not because they need to, but because the briefcase is part of the argument. We are serious. We are resourced. We are the kind of people who win. One of them, the lead, the one who arranged his papers with a deliberateness that said he'd done this many times and intended to do it many more, was named, she learned from the filing, Corvan Grudd. He had a face that was pleasant in the way of a man who has learned that pleasant is more effective than aggressive and has been practicing it for 20 years. He nodded at her when she sat down. She didn't nod back, not out of hostility, just she was busy thinking, and she didn't owe him a nod. Judge Harlow entered at 9:03. He was 59, gray, the kind of judge who had been a judge long enough that he'd stopped performing judicial and had simply become it. He sat. He looked at the room. He opened the file. Emergency motion to stay lien transfer, he said. Whitfield versus Bell County Tax Authority with Ridgeback Timber, LLC, as interested party. Counsel, you may proceed. Maddox stood. He was not dramatic. He was not loud. He was the opposite of the Louisville lawyers. In every sense, the slightly worn jacket, the county-level office, the unpretentious delivery. But he had the document, and he had Houston's certified copies, and he had the law. He laid it out. Notification was required under KRS 134.452 to be sent to the registered address of record at the county assessor's office. The registered address on file as of October 2019, certified documentation attached, was Post Office Box 114, Middlesboro, Kentucky, not the cabin address, not Caney Fork Road. Ridgeback had sent notification to the cabin address. The cabin had been vacant since the property owner's death in September 2023. The heir had retrieved the notification from the registered post office box on November 11, 2023, 4 days after arriving in Bell County, which was the first time she had been physically present to retrieve it. Therefore, the 90-day response window had not properly begun because the notification had never been properly delivered. He sat down. Corvan Grudd stood. He was smooth, very smooth. He acknowledged the address of record question, but argued it was procedurally minor, that the spirit of the notification requirement had been met, that the property had been delinquent for 3 years, that his client had followed standard procedure in every material respect, that the heir's claim of defective notification was a technicality being used to circumvent a legitimate legal process. He used the word technicality 3 times. Dial noticed that. Maddox stood for rebuttal. The law is the technicality, he said. That's what law is. Specific requirements designed to protect property owners from losing land to processes they were never properly notified about. The requirement is not a suggestion. It is not a spirit. It is a specific address filed with a specific office for a specific purpose. Ridgeback did not use that address. The heir was not notified. The window did not begin. He sat down. The room was quiet. Judge Harlow was quiet for a long time. He read something, turned a page, read something else. Dial did not move. She kept both hands flat on the table in front of her, felt the wood under her palms, thought about Etta Rowe's chimney, thought about mortar, thought about the way old mortar crumbles from the inside out, quiet and slow, until one day there's a crack wide enough to see light through. She thought whatever happens, something shifted. Something that was hidden is now in the air, in this room, on this record. That's already something. That's already more than nothing. Judge Harlow looked up. The court finds that notification to a property address does not satisfy the statutory requirement when a different address has been formally registered as the address of record with the county assessor's office. The motion is granted. Lien transfer is stayed. The parties will have 60 days to resolve the matter of outstanding taxes and confirm the validity of the inheritance claim. He closed the file. This court is adjourned. Dial heard those words and did not move for approximately 4 seconds, and then Maddox put his hand briefly on her arm, just briefly, and that was how she knew it was real. Houston behind her made a sound she'd never heard him make before. Not a word, just a sound. The sound of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has just been allowed to set it down. Lottie was already on her feet. The man in the work jacket was nodding. The woman with the cane had one hand pressed flat over her sternum like she was holding herself together. Corvan Gruod gathered his papers with the precise movements of a man who has lost before and knows how to do it without showing it. He did not look at Dial. She looked at him. She thought you came back in 1982 and Ora beat you. You came back in 1994 and Ora beat you. You came back in 2023 and she went outside. The December air hit her clean and cold and sharp. She stood on the courthouse steps and looked at the sky, flat, gray, the gray of early December in the mountains when winter has arrived but hasn't fully committed yet, and breathed. Just breathed. Maddox came out behind her. The taxes, she said, 60 days. I need almost $5,000. I know. I have. She stopped, did the math, the hardware store, the mortar, the trowel, the gas. About $230. I know. Maddox. Lottie's already working on it, he said. She has been for 2 weeks. Dial turned. He was looking at her steadily. The people in that room didn't show up because they had nothing else to do, he said. They showed up because this land means something to people who've been watching it for a long time. She thought Ora drove out here every October, left the pot on Lottie's porch step, checked on the land, kept paying the taxes, year after year, without telling anyone, without making it a thing, just doing it. Because that's what you do with something you love. You show up for it quietly, and you keep showing up, and you don't make a speech about it. She went back to the cabin. 3 days later, Lottie arrived with an envelope, $500, cash, small bills, the kind that come from a kitchen drawer, and a coffee can of their own, from Lottie and 2 other people whose names she didn't know yet, but would. Houston loaned her more. Maddox had already fronted his own motion filing costs and was calling them even, and Ora's truck, the old Silverado that had been sitting in the lean-to since September, registered and insured and running better than it looked. A man from Middlesboro came out and bought it on December 14th, $800. She stood in the clearing afterward with $800 in her hand and looked at where the truck had been and thought about Aura driving it out here every October. She thought, thank you for the truck, for the taxes, for the job at the assessor's office, for the key in the chimney, for the comb, for all of it, every piece of it. She paid the taxes on December 19th, $4,847. She stood at the Bell County Treasurer's window and handed over the check and watched the clerk stamp the receipt. Tax lien satisfied. She folded the receipt and put it in her jacket pocket next to the comb, drove back to the cabin, built the fire, sat at the table, and then she did the thing she'd been putting off. She drove to Meadow Glen. The care facility on Route 25 was smaller than she'd expected. One story, a covered porch where 3 residents were sitting in the December cold with blankets on their laps, watching the road. The kind of place that is doing its best, and you can tell. Nettie Foss was in room 12. She was 84 years old, small, her hair white and pinned up in the way of a woman who has always pinned her hair up and intends to keep doing it until she can't. She had a quilt on her lap and a window that looked out at a bare maple tree and a bird feeder that needed refilling. She looked up when Dial came in. She studied her for a moment, the way very old people sometimes do, not impolitely, but thoroughly, seeing more than one thing at once. Your Auras, she said. Not a question. Her granddaughter, Dale. Nettie nodded, like this confirmed something she'd already suspected. Lottie said someone came, she said. I wondered when you'd get here. Dial sat in the chair by the window. She didn't know how to begin, so she started at the beginning. The lawyer's call, the envelope, the drive up Route 421, the cracked chimney, the tin box, the key, the post office, the 43 acres on Tanner Branch. Nettie listened without interrupting. Her hands were still on the quilt. Her eyes were still. When Dial got to Tanner Branch, to the cabin and the padlocked door and the chimney on the east wall, Nettie's hands tightened slightly on the quilt. When Dial said the name Etta Rowe, Nettie closed her eyes, just for a moment, then opened them. You found the letters, she said. 11 pages. She spent a week writing them. I know because she told me after. Nettie looked at the bare maple outside the window. She didn't think anyone would come. Not really, but she built that chimney on purpose, made it wide, set the gap in. She paused. She said it's the one thing they can't take. They can take the land, but they can't take the stone if the stone has already said what it needs to say. Dial looked down at her jacket pocket. She put her hand in, took out the comb, held it out. Nettie's breath changed, just slightly, just enough to hear. She reached out and took the comb with both hands, turned it over, ran her thumb across the engraving on the back. ER. She gave this to Aura the day she signed the deed, Nettie said. Her voice was steady, the steadiness of a woman who has had 60 years to grieve something and has found a way to carry it that doesn't break her. She said, keep this so someone remembers I was here. A silence. Aura kept it, Dial said. I know. Aura told me, once, a long time ago. She turned the comb over again. She said she kept it because someday someone would come who needed to know, who needed to understand that the land had a whole life before it came to them. Dial thought about everything that had led to this room. The chimney, the key, the post office, the motion, the courthouse, the money appearing from kitchen drawers and coffee cans of people who'd known Aura and Etta and this land for longer than she'd been alive. She thought about the comb in Aura's hand, kept for 62 years. She thought about the way Aura had never explained herself, because some things don't need explaining. They just need to be done, and then done again, and handed to the next person. She said one more thing, Nettie said, still looking at the comb. Etta, the day she left. She paused. She said the stone will outlast the argument. It always does. All you have to do is stay long enough to let it. The room was quiet. The bird feeder outside the window was empty. The bare maple moved slightly in the December wind. Dial reached out and gently closed Nettie's hands around the comb. "Keep it," she said. "You knew her. It belongs with someone who knew her." Nettie looked at her for a long moment. Then she pressed the comb to her chest, closed her eyes. Brief, private. "Come back," she said. "When you've got the chimneys done, come back and tell me." "I will." "And bring a picture of the land." She opened her eyes. "I haven't seen it in 30 years. I'd like to see it again, even in a picture." January came. She woke to snow on the ground for the first time. 2 inches, the clearing white, the trees white, the chimney on Caney Fork Road rising from the white and trailing smoke. 3 miles south at Tanner Branch, a chimney she couldn't see from here, but knew was there trailing smoke too. Both fires going, both chimneys holding. The crack in the Caney Fork chimney was fully repointed now. New mortar properly mixed, properly seeded. It would need another pass in spring when the freeze-thaw tested it. But it was closed. The gap was filled. The Tanner Branch chimney she'd repointed too in the 2 weeks since the hearing, working on it in the afternoons after she finished the other. Same grade of mortar, same trowel, same motion until it stopped feeling like work and started feeling like the thing she was supposed to be doing. She stood in the clearing on the morning of the first snow and thought about all the hands that had touched that stone. August Whitfield in 1931, Etta Rowe in 1959. The unnamed others who had come over the decades to repoint the mortar and keep the roof from failing. Maybe Aura, maybe someone Aura had sent, and now her, 20 years old, a coffee can on the table with $231 in it because she'd spent the rest on mortar and a trowel and 2 cords of wood stacked dry under the porch eave because you can't have heat without wood and you can't have a fire without a chimney that holds, a truck that ran when it felt like it, and 62 acres of land in Bell County, Kentucky because it was 43 plus 19 and she'd only recently thought to add them together that no one was going to take. Not today, not while she was here. She pulled out her phone, found the picture she'd taken 2 weeks ago from the ridge at Tanner Branch, the whole hollow visible below, the creek, the clearing, the cabin with its tin roof and the chimney on the east wall, smoke rising straight up in the still air. She sent it to the number Meadow Glen had given her, Nettie's phone, the one the staff helped her use on Sundays. She wrote, "This is it. Both chimneys holding. Come spring, I'll drive you out." She set the phone down. She went inside, built the fire up from the morning coals, set the kettle, sat at the table with both deeds laid flat, and the January light coming through the south window, gray and quiet and enough. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft, unhurried, the kind that doesn't announce itself. She had 2 deeds and 2 chimneys and 62 acres and a January morning and a cup of coffee she was going to make too strong. She had exactly enough, and it was the best $231 she ever spent. If you are sitting somewhere tonight holding something you don't fully understand, yet a letter, a key, an object passed from hand to hand through years you weren't alive for, I want you to know something. Whoever left it did not leave it by accident. They left it because they believed you were coming. They left it because they were paying attention long before you arrived. And so were you. You always were. Tell me in the comments, has someone in your life ever left you something that only made sense years later? Something you carried without understanding until one day you did. I'll read every single one.